Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois Black Panther Party.
Repeat after me. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary.
You're looking at 18 months for the stolen car, 5 years for impersonating a federal officer, or you can go home.
The Black Panthers are forming a rainbow coalition of oppressed brothers and sisters of every color.
Their aim is to sow hatred and inspire terror.
I will learn all that I can.
These ain't no terrorists.
You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special bonus episode of Citizen Dame, where we will be talking about the excellent and fascinating film Judas and the Black Messiah, because we are two white ladies. And, and so we feel that we just really need to express our opinions on this.
Yes, you all need to hear what a Karen has to say about this movie.
A literal Karen is here to give her opinion on this movie about the Black Panthers. So yes, I am Lauren Humphreys Brooks, and with me as always is Karen Peterson. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Lauren.
We really are very white. Like, I think that we just have to
so
admit
white.
that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So white.
So since this is a bonus episode, we're just going to get right into talking about the excitement that is Judas and the Black Messiah. So this film just came out on HBO Max, last week?
Yeah, Friday.
And it was initially supposed to be released in the summer of 2020, and then of course pandemic happened and it got pushed back, it got pushed around. I mean, I'm happy. I honestly thought that it was going to wind up doing one of those brief theatrical releases before it went to streaming. And I was actually kind of happy to see it show up on HBO Max, because I was like, oh, good, I actually get to watch this, because I've been wanting to see it. So it is a fascinating film. It stars Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield. Daniel Kaluuya plays Fred Hampton, who's the chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party in the late 1960s. And Lakeith Stanfield plays William O'Neill, who's an FBI informant who kind of gets conned into becoming an FBI informant and reporting on the Panthers, and eventually directly leads to, spoiler alert, the assassination of Fred Hampton. But there's a lot of stuff that obviously that happens in between that. And I think that it's probably one of the, definitely one of the first films about the Black Panthers that I've seen that has really gone in depth into what the political philosophy was of the Black Panthers and of Hampton specifically. And this whole very shady shit that the FBI was involved in during the COINTELPRO, which is the least helpful acronym I think that anyone has ever come up with, which was this kind of this intelligence program, essentially, that was meant to undercut. It was meant to root out communists, supposedly, but it was meant to undercut groups like the Black Panthers, like Martin Luther King, etc., in order to kind of appease J. Edgar Hoover's terror of communism and terror of Black people.
To this day, I pronounce it COINTELPRO.
It's really tempting.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really tempting to be like, it's the COINTELPRO.
What's
No,
COINTEL? Yeah.
I mean, this was a thing. Like, if you read up on the behavior of the FBI in this period, it makes you very ashamed to be an American and very ashamed to be a white person. So a lot of what it was aiming at was basically subverting and undercutting things like the Vietnam War, anti-Vietnam War movement, the Civil Rights movement, Black Power movement, environmentalists, American Indian movement, basically everybody, including, bizarrely enough, the KKK. So supposedly they were also going after them at the same time, but we never really hear about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was basically everybody who didn't fall into the Leave It to Beaver,
Yeah.
stereotype trope of this, what the perfect, American family is supposed to be and act like and do and look like. And that was kind of anybody who was counter to that was kind of considered in some circles to be an enemy of the government and or at least had the possibility of being an enemy of the government and someone that needed to be investigated and harassed and basically brought into the fold to act right.
Well, and I think that this film represents really well I hesitate to say danger, but the danger that someone like J. Edgar Hoover would definitely think Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers were proving. Because the Panthers and Hampton in particular this is not just the Black Power movement, it's a communist movement, it's a socialist movement. It's, referencing things like Lenin and Marx and Mao. And he's, Hampton is kind of preaching to this not just armed revolution, but also a very social movement, right? So, and the film covers very well the activity that the Panthers engaged in just sort of, opening up free breakfast programs and educational programs in their neighborhoods. And so they're essentially stepping into spaces where the government has failed and is saying like, okay, we're going to educate our people. We're going to educate the people on the streets. The most interesting element that I found in terms of the activity of the Panthers in this period was this establishment of what Hampton in the film refers to as a rainbow coalition of not just the Black Panthers, but also the Crowns, it's a gang, a local gang, plus Latinx and white organizations that are all kind of coming together to being like, we're all being fucked, basically. We're all being fucked by the government. We're being fucked by J. Edgar Hoover. We're being fucked by this entire situation in Vietnam, et cetera. And that's something he's trying to bring together all of these groups and saying like, we all have a similar goal in that we're the ones that are being hurt and we need to protect ourselves and possibly foment revolution. So I found that really interesting, that the film actually really delved into that a little bit more. It wasn't just about Hampton and the Black Panthers. It was about the entire, what was going on in that period.
Yeah. And I think that you needed to show that to really tell the complete story that they're trying to tell. And I mean, we can discuss really how complete this was, even with all of that, that information, that backstory going into it. But yeah, I think that it was helpful because even, for me, I feel like I've studied a lot about different groups, but even with the Black Panthers, like I haven't been that well versed on really what their philosophies were and what their central goals were besides equality, besides freedom for their people. And so learning so much more about what they were trying to do beyond that. And also, like you mentioned, okay, well, if we're not going to get good education and good social programs through the government, then we're going to do it ourselves in these other ways. And I think it was really cool to actually see that and to see the collaborations, the conversations, the places where people who are more or less on the same side also still don't agree and sometimes would work together anyway and sometimes wouldn't. And I think that was really good that they showed all of those facets, because it really is a fascinating story and a fascinating part of history that I would gather, or I would venture to say, a lot of people don't know the full history of this time period.
Yeah, or if we do, we have a fairly definitely, and I'm saying this as a white person, like I've looked at, you know, the counterculture movement in the 1960s. I've always been really interested in that. The Black Panthers always seemed somewhat ancillary, and some of that was because a lot of the histories and a lot of the information I was reading was very white centric, and it was being told by white historians, and the, you know, so often the Panthers have been represented as just this violent gang almost, who were dangerous, or people who were basically a fringe movement that didn't really mean anything. And that's not true at any level.
One of the earliest depictions that I can remember of the Black Panthers, and I'm sure I saw earlier depictions than this, but one of the ones that I remember clearly is the party that Forrest Gump goes to in Forrest Gump. And that, it's like, yeah, you see them in their leather jackets and their berets and stuff, and they look tough, but then you have that guy who's just kind of pontificating, and I don't remember the scene as clearly as I do. Like, I don't remember specifically who that was, but it gave, the way that they were shown in that didn't give the impression to me that they were actually dangerous. Like, it felt like they were trying to kind of say, like, oh no, they weren't dangerous people, they just talked tough. That was one of the representations that I remember seeing.
Yeah, there's a sense of there's a humor almost, that it's like, well, we don't really take them seriously and everything. Well, I mean, the FBI took them incredibly seriously, obviously, as this film shows. And when you really listen to at least what Fred Hampton is saying in this film, and then if you actually watch some of his speeches or listen to some of his speeches not on this film, you realize how incredibly radical he was and the Black Panthers were, and how that, like, and that was married to a lot of the other things that were going on in the 1960s, and it's married to a lot of the things that are going on today, which I think we're going to talk about in a little while.
Yeah, well, I was even going to say, like, some of the stuff that they were espousing back then would even still be radical today too.
Yeah, and a lot of it, you know, it's feeding into, most people, including most radicals, I don't think go quite as far as to valorize Mao.
Right.
Although Mao, some of the things that Mao says and some of his perspectives, you might be like, okay, well, we can take that, right? But not so much. Marx and Engels, definitely, yes, we can talk about Marx and Engels a little bit more. But not so much Mao. A lot of bad shit went on, but that was, I mean, if you watch a lot of films from that period, there was a lot of counterculture speech about how that was actually a direction that a number of people wanted to go, not completely processing, or maybe they were processing it and just didn't care about how damaging Mao's, you know, cultural revolution was ultimately going to be. But so let's talk about, since we're talking about Fred Hampton, let's talk about Daniel Kaluuya in this, because, like, what a spectacular actor. I mean,
he's incredible.
He's so good, and he gets not just the passion of the speech, but the rhythm of it. And I thought it was I just found it so powerful, the way that the character believes so strongly in what he's doing, and believes not really in himself and his importance, but the fact that he has a capability to help to lead other people. And one of my favorite moments is that it's fairly late in the film where they're talking about, you know, can we get him out of the country, right? And they're all talking about different ways, like, oh, we can funnel him, we can send him to Algeria or something like that to basically save him from having to go to prison. And he stops and he says, like, you know, why are we talking about me? I'm not important. What's important is the medical clinic we're going to build. What's important is the people that we're going to help. And in Kaluuya's performance, you definitely get that sense that he is in his mind, he is doing this for the people, right? And he believes in them, and they're not just a thing to him. They're not just an entity. They're real flesh and blood. And that seems to be where he draws so much of his power from, is that he wants to help his people, and his people is a very expansive idea of what his people is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. That scene in particular is so powerful, but and it really does, he's great in it, but it also really does do a good job of showing that this wasn't just about him, and that he knew that. And because I think that so often, especially today, we see leaders who really, they might say the right things, but they're really in it for themselves. And that's on all levels. That's not just political. That's, like in certain churches or other political groups, or other just movements and things. You see people that kind of rise up, and they lead a certain way, and they espouse some ideas, but then when it comes down to it, it's like, how much are they really practicing that, and how much is it really about what the accomplishment, what they're trying to accomplish, and how much of it is just them trying to make a name for themselves. He very clearly was not that. He very clearly was about this movement. That's why he was willing to go to prison. Even, he was willing to lay down his life for this cause, because he knew that he was fighting for something that really was important, and that he believed that he was fighting to make a better world. And it's interesting to see that, especially when you consider the fact, and I know we'll talk about this in a minute, but when you consider the fact that Fred Hampton was 21 years old.
Yeah, and I think that let's talk a little bit more about Kaluuya, and then I think that we should talk about that too, because that's been one of the criticisms of this film. There's one of his speeches that he gives. He says, you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill a revolution. You could kill a freedom fighter, but you cannot kill freedom. And that, it's in some ways it's such an easy turn of phrase, but at the same time, the way that he says it, he believes it. And because he believes it, he helps his audience to believe it. And he plays that out throughout the entire film. We are not doing this for me. We are not doing this for you. We're doing this for all of us.
Yeah. Right.
And if that means that I die or that I go to prison, because, and throughout the film, he's got this sense that he's not going to survive. He practically knows that. He's like, they are going to kill me in some way.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I would love to know if that was just, foreshadowing on the part of the filmmakers, or if that was something that he really did have a sense of. And that I'm not sure about. But yeah, I mean, he really just had this poetic way of speaking. I had to turn on the subtitles because there were times where it was really hard for me to catch what he was saying. And once I turned the subtitles on, I was just like, wow, this is incredible. This dialogue that he's getting out as quickly as he is, and with this very particular speech pattern and everything, it was actually pretty amazing. And I think something else too that's interesting about the way that Kaluuya portrays him, and also just the way that the stories are written and the way that the character develops, is it's interesting how in the first speech that you see him give, where he's in that classroom, like when Lakeith Stanfield is there, and he's kind of captivating them, and people are mostly, they're listening, but they're not riveted. And then when he gives that later speech toward the end, and he's commanded the audience's attention, and it's a full big room full of people that are just hanging on every word. And I think it's so fascinating to see the way that progression happens, and to see the way that he has really just been able to take command and to come into his own, and to really move people.
Yeah, and that's that speech that I think we're both talking about is after he's been in prison. So, and there's definitely a shift in his character that happens, and it's a subtle one. It isn't like he doesn't come out a completely different person.
Right.
But there's definitely a shift in his character that has happened between him having gone to prison and then leaving, and beforehand, like you say, where he's dedicated, but that urgency, I guess, isn't there yet. I think that maybe some of it is that within the character, he knows at some level that he is going to go back to prison, that he's not going to be allowed to be here. And so there's an urgency that I have to get out what I need to say. I have to get these people connected to each other.
You've been listening to an excerpt from our latest bonus episode of Judas and the Black Messiah. To unlock all kinds of bonus content, please visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/citizendame.